Hello everyone, I'm Ed Waldrop, the Master Technician here at iCracked. Today we're going to cover how to repair the iPhone 6s. Unlike any other previous edition of phone, the 6s, we want to warn you, has a gasket that surrounds the perimeter of the bezel of the glass between the frame and the bezel itself. So lifting this is not going to be as easy as some of our other versions. The adhesive is pretty strong, but it does come loose. A few things we want to do before we repair a phone is make sure that everything on it functions, like the fingerprint scanner. We want to make sure the digitizer 3D Force Touch is working by activating it on an app. So we want to grab an icon and make sure the touch works around the perimeter and make sure that it goes off page and back to the previous page to ensure that there's no other issues going on with the phone. Make sure your home button works. You want to energize your camera and test the rear microphone and the camera as well. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Flip the camera over and test the front microphone and the front camera. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And then go ahead and play those back. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Make sure the loudspeakers work, and that tells me that this front microphone is working. Testing 1, 2, and there's the rear microphone, and it is working as well. I'll go ahead and delete those. So the other thing we want to do is open up Voice Memo to test the lower microphones, which are the two located down here. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Testing 1, 2, okay, 3, we know 3, those work. 2, and then over here you have the little blue speaker icon. If you touch that and turn it gray, then that sends the audio to the ear speaker, in which we can test the proximity sensor by covering it up and the screen should go dark. At the same time, we want to test the headphone jacks, or the earbuds of the headphone jack, by plugging it in and playing back that same audio. Make sure we get audio out of both the left and the right earbud. Okay, both of those are good. Then I'm going to plug it in and make sure that the phone charges. I should get the green battery with the lightning bolt, and we want to make sure that the battery comes up at least 1%. There's no sense in replacing the screen if you have other issues going on without all the proper parts needed. Okay, so I'm pretty determined that this phone is good and it's charging. So I'm going to unplug my charger and go ahead and power it down to begin this repair. Now, included with your kit are some various tools that you're going to need for opening this, such as the pentalobe screwdriver, the Phillips screwdriver, the nylon spudger, suction cup, and plastic pry tool, and maybe the guitar pick. Now, some tools that would make this job easier are going to be something such as a heat gun or a hair dryer, just to warm up the screen to loosen the adhesive to lift it. And for those who are doing more than just one repair, I would highly recommend you get an iCracked or an iSesmo. These will also help in lifting the screen. So the first thing I'm going to do here is go ahead and warm up my screen to help loosen the adhesive. Now, one thing I want to, if you're going to use a hot air gun, they get very hot and it's an uncontrollable heat. You don't want to point this at your person or anything that could possibly be flammable. And just kind of protect yourself from touching the face, because it can get well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, heat up my screen. Now I'm only holding this at about 2 to 3 inches above the screen. I don't want to put it all the way down and worry about melting anything that may be plastic. And I'm continually moving so that I get an even heat all the way around. So I'll continue heating. Now that my screen is nice and warm, I'm going to go ahead and pull out the two pentalobe screws located to the left and the right of the charging port. Okay, if the screen is cooled down, you want to go ahead and just keep warming it up. So I'm going to apply the suction cup just above the home button and give it a little pull. That's going to create a slight gap down at the bottom where I could take my plastic pry tool and insert it just above the headphone jack. And then I'm going to slowly come around, breaking that adhesive seal at the bottom. And then slowly begin to separate it as the adhesive starts separating. Run this all the way up the sides here. There we go. Until we get enough to start lifting, just like that. Now, there are a few cables that are connected up here at the top to the phone. So you don't want to just rip this screen right off because you could possibly create damage to the logic board. And very gently separate all the adhesive here to where the screen is free to lift. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the screen here between my fingers, and then I'm going to remove the battery cover using the Phillips screwdriver. Now, one thing I'll say is while you're doing this repair, you want to keep very good track of the screws. All the screws are different sizes, and putting the incorrect screw in the wrong place could potentially damage the phone beyond use. So now I've removed the two screws. I'm going to remove the plate for the battery. Then I'm going to use my nylon spudger to disconnect the battery. Now, when you want to come in here, you're going to come in on this side here, and you want to come just below the little metal shelf here and pop this up. Try not to dig down into the logic board because, again, there are surface mount components there that could irreparably damage the phone. So I'm just going to come in here very gently, disconnect the battery, and lift it up just like that. Next, we're going to focus on the retaining bracket for all the cables of this display. Now, there's 4 Phillips screws, and again, this is very crucial that you keep good. It's very crucial that you keep good organization of your screws because these top screws are a lot longer than the bottom screws, and if you mix these up and put them in there, you'll drill a hole in the logic board and ruin the phone. Okay, now that I've removed the 4 screws, I'm going to very gently lift the shield here and set this aside. I like to set the bracket next to the screws that I know they go to. Okay, now that's removed, I have access to the 3 cables that are attaching the display assembly to the phone body. Now using the pointed end of the nylon spudger, and again, you want to just come up underneath the little shelf of each of these connectors and don't dig down below. These will lift off very easily with a nudge. So the first one I'm going to start is this one here on the far right, which is the home button extension cable. I'm going to come in from here and very gently disconnect it from the logic board. Next is the front-facing camera accessory cable. And I'm going to come in from the outside edge here where the battery is and very gently lift that connector, just like that, which exposes the last cable, which is the LCD and the digitizer. And again, I'm coming from the outside edge, and I come from out here because they're the safest areas to get to without much of a risk of damaging components should your spudger slip. So I come up underneath and disconnect that cable. Now I can remove the entire assembly away from the frame. Okay, now that the display has been separated from the frame, as you can see here, the black adhesive strips down the side pretty much stayed intact, but at the top and the bottom, these white pieces are pretty much destroyed. So I'm just going to go ahead and lift and remove those so that I don't forget when I reassemble it and don't get them stuck or in my way. Now, at the time of this video, we don't yet have these strips to replace them, but we're hoping at the time that the kits are available, the adhesive strips will be included, in which you would just replace back in the location on the sides. So now I can go ahead and set the frame aside and begin removing all the components of the display assembly that I'm going to have to transfer over to the replacement screen. Okay, so I'm going to start by removing the components off the old display assembly to transfer to the new one by beginning up here at the top where the ear speaker bracket is. I'm going to remove these 3 Phillips screws, and again, keeping good organization of my screws so that they go back in the same location they came out of. Now the ear speaker retraining bracket here also has like a gasket band that goes around the LCD controller here, so we'll have to very gently peel this off because you want it to stay intact when you put this piece back on so that it comes around and it holds the flex cable in place. Next, I'm going to very gently lift the front-facing camera, which gives me access to the ear speaker, and then lift and remove the ear speaker and set it aside. Next, I'm going to begin by taking the 8 screws off the thermal plate. The one at the top is at a 90-degree angle here. And then the one at the bottom, just above the home button bracket. And then the 6 down the side, which are all the same screws. So now I can lift the thermal plate up, but what we're going to notice here is up at the top where the LCD controller is, there's strips of adhesive that are holding it to the thermal plate, so you can't just rip this off. You may have to get a pair of tweezers and come in here and very gently separate the adhesive from the plate here. Now the adhesive is pretty strong. There we go. There's one side. Come in here and do the opposite side. Okay, now that those two strips of adhesive have been freed, then I can go ahead and slide the thermal plate out of my way. Next, I'm going to remove the two remaining screws holding the home button bracket to the bezel. Remove the home button bracket. And underneath here, you're going to see the home button with the flex cable attaching to an extension cable which runs underneath this plate, which is physically part of the screen. Now, when disconnecting this, you want to be extremely cautious. Should you rip this home button flex cable, the phone is pretty much useless. You can put it back together and either your home button or your biometric scanner will not work, but you can never update the phone because every iOS update checks the validity of the biometric scanner IC, and when it can't detect it, it throws up an error and will pretty much brick the phone, meaning that it will no longer function because you cannot upgrade it. So I'm going to take my plastic pry tool and very gently come in here, get underneath the cable and the plate, and lift to separate it from the extension cable, as you can see here. Next, I'm going to take the flat end of my nylon spudger and come up underneath of the home button. If this is fighting you, I would turn it over, hit it with the hair dryer to loosen up that adhesive. But we found that these are actually not as strong an adhesive as previous generation phones, and it comes off relatively easy. Now, you don't want to just rip this off because this little thin flex cable is attached here where all the components are, and that has a tiny bit of adhesive holding it to the bezel. So what I'm going to do is come up underneath here and very gently separate that piece so that I can now take the entire home button out as an assembly and set it aside. Next, we're going to disconnect the front-facing camera with microphone from the display assembly. So I'm going to very gently lift this piece up, which will give me access to the ambient light sensor and the proximity sensor, and take the pointed end of my nylon spudger and very gently nudge these pieces out of their brackets. You don't want to use any kind of force because if you damage the proximity sensor or the ambient light sensor, then you're going to have issues when you're talking on the phone that the screen won't darken on you. So now that that's disconnected, it gives me access to the microphone. Now I'm going to very gently roll the cable so that I could show you here. You do not need to do this, but it makes it easier for me to show you here. So you have the microphone here, which is held on to the boot cover with a little bit of adhesive. So what we're going to have to do is get underneath here and break the microphone with flex cable from that boot. You can come in here with the nylon spudger, very gently get up underneath and separate it, just like that. Now, one thing you want to do is make sure that the ambient light sensor gasket stayed on the ambient light sensor. Otherwise, it's going to be sitting inside this area of the screen, in which you could just pop it out and set it back on there. If this was a black screen, inside the ambient light sensor, you'd also have what we call an ambient light sensor filter. You would have to dig that filter out, which is a little white square, and transfer it over to the new display. Now that everything here is ready, I'm going to get the new display assembly and begin putting all the parts back on. Okay, now that I have the new display, we're going to begin transferring all the components removed back to the new display. So let's go ahead and remove the anti-static plate on the back. And we'll start by placing the home button back into the body. And making sure that the flex cable has dropped onto the alignment pins, both here and here, and that the home button itself has dropped into the body. It should be nice and flush. I'm going to take the home button flex cable and reconnect it to the home button extension cable, just like that. And you should feel a nice firm click. Now I'm going to take the home button retaining plate, set this here, and insert and tighten the two screws. So we have the screw down here at the bottom, and then the screw on the top left. Now you don't want to over tighten these, just run the screws until they stop. Now let's make sure that you have that nice click of the home button and that it's working. Okay, I felt that nice, beautiful click. Now, this flap here, if you remember, we had to peel those tapes off. So what we're going to do is reattach the tapes very gently underneath here so that it extends beyond. Now you want to do this cautiously because you don't want to damage the cable here. Just like that. Then we'll take the thermal plate and lay it down here. Now you want to make sure that this flap goes underneath the thermal plate here, but also that your tapes aren't cut underneath but come this side. And then on this end of the thermal plate here, it has a little protruding area that has to slide into this area of the bezel. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually very easy to do. So what I'm going to do is hold the tape up, and I'm going to take the thermal plate over the top of the flap, insert it there, come around this side, pull the tape up, and then lay it down into place. Then go ahead and make sure that's good and loose. Okay. Now I'm going to take the bottom thermal plate screw and insert it just enough to get the thread started, but not tightening it because we still want to be able to insert the rest of the screws. Then I'm going to take the top screw and bring it in here at that 90-degree angle and get it started. Next, I'll take the 6 screws that go down the side, 3 on the left, 3 on the right, and begin inserting them. And again, I'm not tightening all these, I'm just getting the thread started. Make sure I get 1 or 2 good revolutions of the screw so that I know it grabs. And once all the screws are in, then we'll go back and tighten the screws so that we know that the thermal plate is correctly aligned. Okay, there's the last screw. Now I'm going to go back here and counterclockwise direction, go through and tighten all the screws. Now I'm going to take the tapes that we peeled off earlier and smooth them against the thermal plate, just like that. Next, we're going to take the front-facing camera cable and attach it in place. Now, the cable houses the front camera, the ambient light sensor, the proximity sensor, the upper front microphone, and the connections for the ear speaker. So the microphone itself here attaches right in this area, and you'll see a piece of adhesive backing that you're going to have to remove. Now the microphone on the flex cable has this hole right here. This hole is going to slide over this alignment pin located up here at the top. Using tweezers will really help you out here. Okay. So your microphone will stick and set in just like that. Next, we're going to place the ambient light sensor and proximity sensor into place just by pushing it down like that. Now, don't pull the front-facing camera back too far and try not to touch the physical lens with your fingers so you don't want to transfer your skin oils to the lens, otherwise you'll get blurry images. So once this is in place, you should feel this area of the cable sit nice and flat, and it should be level with the boot of the ear speaker. Next, I'm going to take the ear speaker and I'm going to put it in place, ensuring that this oval area at the bottom of the ear speaker fully sits inside this boot located right here. If this doesn't get in there correctly, you'll get distorted audio or very low audio through the ear speaker itself. So I'm going to go ahead and take it and pop it down and then push, and you should feel it pop in. And when it's sitting in, the ear speaker itself will sit nice just like that. So next, we're going to take the front-facing camera, bring it over the ear speaker, and set it down, making sure that the ear speaker contacts located here, they have an alignment pin on the left and the right, which will go over the pins here and here on the actual ear speaker itself. Now everything here, pressing down with your finger, should feel nice, flat, and level. If you feel any hump or it just doesn't feel right, go back and double check that your ear speaker actually went into the boot. So next I'm going to take the ear speaker bracket and lay it over the top here and set it down. And again, those alignment pins on the ear speaker, which come through the flex cable, are also going to come up and protrude through this retaining bracket. And when it's down in place, it should be nice and flat and flush like that. So I'm going to start with the center screw here to hold it down. And I'm putting in just enough so that it holds the bracket in place. I don't want to tighten it yet. Okay, now that all three screws in, you notice I have not fully tightened them yet. One thing you want to check is to make sure that the the LCD controller here doesn't get caught underneath the ear speaker retaining plate. See, sit down, you should have nice free movement here. So now I'll go ahead and very gently tighten these. You do not want to over tighten these screws. If you over tighten it, you could shift the ear speaker so it's not, the springs on the top won't be touching the contacts, and it'll give you a scratchy or echoey sound, in which case you would just come back, loosen those, and slide the ear speaker over a little. And next we have this little gasket here, which holds all this in place. So what this does is it's going to hold this flex nice and snug upward. And again, this is where tweezers come in handy. You can stretch it and set it on the outside here, just like that. One thing you want to do when you're doing this is you don't want to force it on. You don't want to stab and poke because you'll puncture this flex cable. So you want to be as cautious as possible just so that it comes down the edge. Now that everything's back in, take a look at your mat or whatever you use for your screws. Make sure there's no extra screws. And then let's take a look at our cable placement. Now, the front-facing camera cable should be the topmost cable. And if you look, you're going to see this little rigid area here. This should be displayed so that when you put it inside the phone, this is what protects the internal components of the frame from rubbing and damaging the cable. And then next should be the LCD digitizer, and then on the bottom here is your home button extension cable. Now the display is ready to go into the frame, we have to do some quick checks. We want to take a look at the connectors on the logic board. They have these gaskets now that go around each connector. You want to make sure that none of the gaskets have rolled over, which would inhibit the flex cable from actually sitting into the connector. As you can see down here, this one's stretched a little bit, but I've been able to very gently pull it back so it's out of the way. Now what this does is this will seal against the flex cables. So should this go underwater, it'll help keep moisture out of the connections, which is what causes the largest amount of damage from being immersed. So I'm going to take this, and the first cable I'm going to connect here is going to be the home button extension cable. I'm going to line it and push it down. You should feel a nice, good snap, and the cable should fit flush. If it feels like it's angled in any way, disconnect and reseat, and make sure that little gasket didn't get folded over and caught. Next, I'm going to do the LCD digitizer combination cable. Line this up and press. And you'll feel the snap on each end, and you should hear it as well. And lastly, we're going to do the front-facing camera and accessory cable. And you should feel that snap too on both ends. Now press your finger on the top of all the flex cables, and they should all be nice, flat, and flush. Now I can take the retaining plate and set it there. As you notice, I'm going to hold the retaining plate in place with one finger while letting the screen settle between my other fingers, as you don't want the screen to fall back on you because it could stretch and damage those cables. So I'm going to start by putting the two small screws in. And again, I'm just starting the threads. I'm not actually tightening them until I get all 4 screws in. And then I'll go back and tighten them. Now one thing about these screws is they are very short, and they're very, very close when they bottom out to the logic board. Should you over tighten these screws, you can irreparably damage the logic board. So you want to tighten them enough to secure, but not enough to over torque and damage it. You see I'm only using a little bit of finger pressure. Last, I'm going to stick the longest screw, which goes on the top right area. Once all 4 screws in, then I'm going to go and tighten them just to where the screws stop. Do not over tighten them. Next, I'm going to take the battery flex cable and reconnect it to the logic board. Press it down, you'll feel it snap in. So next I'm going to take the battery retaining plate, set it in place, and take the 2 Phillips screws and insert them. Now the longer of the 2 screws does go battery side. Now that the 2 screws are inserted, I'm going to go through and tighten them, and again, not over tightening them, just till they stop. Now you notice at the top of the display, you're going to see these tabs along this edge. These tabs clip in under the frame here. So you're going to take this and go at about a 20-degree angle to where you see the top of the screen is flush within the frame. Once that's there, then go ahead and press and insert pop the bottom down, and then run your fingers up the side, and you'll feel it all snap down. Next, I'm going to turn on the phone, and while the phone is booting, I'll go ahead and insert my 2 pentalobe screws. Okay, so now my phone looks as good as new. So let's go ahead and test everything out and make sure nothing got damaged. The first thing I'm going to do is plug it into a charger. I should get the green battery and the lightning bolt indicating it's charging. It's currently at 66%. So as we go through the course of checking everything, the battery should rise. So the first thing we want to do is test the force touch. I go to the camera, press and press hard, and you should get the shortcut letting you know that the force touch works. You should also feel the haptic engine when you do that. Next, I'm going to lightly touch to where my icons are all jiggly, and then move it and make sure I have touch all over the screen. Make sure that it goes off screen and back to the page it was on. Test my home button. Home button's working. Put it to sleep. Let's test the biometric scanner. Okay, that's working. It unlocked the phone. Next, we're going to test the cameras again. So there's the front camera. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And then play it back. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3. So we know the front camera is good, and we know that the microphone is in the correct alignment. If your volume was really low, it's most likely that when you attach the microphone to the boot that it got slightly offset. There's a tiny hole in the adhesive that lines up with the back side of the microphone. So you may have to go on and move that if your volume is not recording very loud. Next, I'm going to go to voice memo and test my 2 bottom microphones. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3. Okay, and then I'm going to set that the speaker icon is gray so I can test the ear speaker and the proximity sensor. So when I put my finger over it, the phone should go to sleep. And I held the phone up to my ear so I could hear it, and then I looked down at the screen and it did in fact go dark. And my battery is now up to 68%, so I know I didn't damage the charging port. I felt the vibrator, so I know that's good. We got my microphone, and lastly, I'm going to test my rear camera. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and play it back. Testing 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. At any time during any of the audio playbacks, you can plug in your headphone into the audio jack to test to make sure you get audio through both the left and the right. And the reason why we do this is because we're actually digging under the bezel. The headphone jack is so close that there is a small risk that you damage that, and that's why we test this. Okay, I have audio through both, so that's good. It appears everything on my phone is fully functioning. I have a nice brand new screen. That's it for the iPhone 6s display assembly repair. Don't forget to go to iCracked.com for all your iPhone, iPad, and iPod needs.